Section 46 of the Endeavour Journal of Sir Joseph Banks. Journal from 25 August 1768 to 12 July 1771 by Joseph Banks. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Gail Timmerman Vaughan. Section 46. September 1770. 1770, September 1. Distant as the land was, a very fragrant smell came off from it, really in the morn, with the little breeze which blew right off shore. It resembled much the smell of blue benjamin. As the sun gathered power it died away, and was no longer smelt. All the latter part of the day we had calms or light winds round all the compass, the weather at the same time being most intolerably hot. 1770, September 2. Fresh breeze again at east. In the morn the sweet smell of yesterday was observed, though in a much smaller degree. In the even it was almost calm, and again intensely hot. 1770, September 3. After having sailed all night along shore with a brisk breeze, we found ourselves in the morn not far from it. It appeared, as it had done whenever we had seen it before, uncommonly flat and low, not having so much as a slope in any part, the whole one grove of trees, very thick, and pleasant to all appearance. This was the 6th day we had now coasted along, still upon the same bank of mud, which by its shoalness prevented our approaches near enough to make going ashore convenient. This delay, and the loss of so many days' fair wind, when we well knew the southeast monsoon was nearly at an end, was irksome to us all. It was therefore resolved to run the ship in as near the shore as possible, and then send off the pinnace, which might go ashore while the ship plied off and on, and learn whether the produce of the country or the usage she might meet with from the inhabitants would be such as might induce us to search farther. We accordingly stood right in shore, and at 8:30 had less than 3 fathom water 5 or 6 miles from the shore. The captain, Dr. Sullender, and myself, with the boat's crew and my servants, consisting in all of 12 men well armed, went in her, and rowed directly toward the shore, but could not get nearer than about 200 yards, on account of the shallowness of the water. We quickly, however, got out of the boat and waded ashore, leaving 2 in her to take care of her. We had no sooner landed than we saw the prints of naked feet upon the mud below high water mark, which convinced us that the Indians were not far off, though we had seen yet no signs of any. The nature of the country made it necessary for us to be very much upon our guard. The close, thick wood came down to within less than 100 yards of the water, and therefore so near might the Indians come without our seeing them, and should they by numbers overpower us, a retreat to the boat was impossible, as she was so far from the shore. We proceeded therefore with much caution, looking carefully about us, myself and the doctor looking for plants at the edge of the wood, and the rest walking along the beach. In about 200 yards from our landing we came to a grove of coconut trees, of a very small growth, but well hung with fruit, standing upon the banks of a small brook of brackish water. Near them was a small shed, hardly half covered with coconut leaves, in and about which were infinite coconut shells, some quite fresh. We stayed under these trees some time, admiring and wishing for the fruit, but as none of us could climb, it was impossible to get even one, so we even left them and proceeded in search of anything else which might occur. We soon found plantains and a single breadfruit tree, but neither of these had any fruit on them, so we proceeded, and had got about 1/4 of a mile from the boat, when on a sudden 3 Indians rushed out of the woods with a hideous shout, about 100 yards beyond us, and running towards us. The foremost threw something out of his hand, which flew on one side of him, and burned exactly like gunpowder. The other 2 immediately threw 2 darts at us, on which we fired. The most of our guns were loaded with small shot, which at the distance they were from us I suppose they hardly felt, for they moved not at all, but immediately threw a 3rd dart, on which we loaded and fired again. Our balls, I suppose, this time fell near them, but none of them were materially hurt, as they ran away with great alacrity. From this specimen of the people we immediately concluded that nothing was to be got here but by force, which would of course be attended with destruction to many of these poor people, whose territories we had certainly no right to invade, either as discoverers or people in real want of provisions. We therefore resolved to go in our boat, and leave entirely this coast to some aftercomer who might have either time or better opportunities to gain the friendship of its inhabitants. Before we had got abreast of her, however, We saw the 2 people in her make signals to us that more Indians were coming along shore, and before we had got into the water, we saw them come round a point, about 500 yards from us. They had met, probably, the 3 who first attacked us, for on seeing us they halted, and seemed to wait till the main body should come up, nor did they come nearer us all the while we waited to her. They continued, however, with their fire to defy us, and shouted very loud. When we were embarked and afloat, we rowed towards them, and fired some muskets over their heads into the trees, on which they walked gradually off, continuing to throw abundance of their fires, whatever they might be designed for. We guessed their numbers to be about 100. After we had looked at them and their behaviour, as long as we chose, we returned to the ship, where our friends had suffered much anxiety for our sakes, imagining the fires thrown by the Indians were real muskets, so much did they resemble the fire and smoke made by the firing of one. The place where we landed we judged to be near Cabo de la Colta de Santa Bonaventura, as it is called in the French charts, about 9 or 10 leagues to the southward of Kirweer. We were not ashore, upon the whole, more than 2 hours, so cannot be expected to have made many observations. The soil had all the appearance of the highest fertility, but was covered with a prodigious quantity of trees, which seemed to thrive luxuriantly. Notwithstanding this, the cocoa-nut trees bore very small fruit, and the plantains did not seem very thriving. The only breadfruit tree that we saw, however, was very large and healthy. There was very little variety of plants. We saw only 23 species, every one of which was known to us, except perhaps the first and second may prove upon comparison to be different from many of the species of cyperus we have still undetermined from New Holland. Had we had axes to cut down the trees, or could we have ventured into the woods, we should doubtless have found more, but we had only an opportunity of examining the beach and edge of the wood. I am of opinion, however, that the country does not abound in variety of species, as I have been in no one before, where I could not, on a good soil, have gathered more by far with the same time and opportunity. Here follows the list. Cyperus... Eugenia butonica Misker. Comerlina communis, Linn. Vitex trifolia, Linn. Convolvulus brasiliensis, Linn. Hibiscus tiliaceus, Linn. Solanum nigrum, Linn. Lysine speciosa, Misker. Morinda citrifolia, Linn. Dolichos giganteus, Misker. Caetia taca, Misker. Abris precatorius, Linn. Lobelia plumierii, Linn. Hedicerum umbulatum, Linn. Arum macroizum, Linn. Citodium altili, Misker. Qua lacrima jobi, Linn. Casuarina equisetifolia, Misker. Willandina bonducella, Linn. Massa paradisiaca, Linn. Cocos nucifera, Linn. The people, as well as we could judge, were nearly of the same colour as the New Hollanders, some though rather lighter. They were certainly stark naked. Their arms that they made use of against us were very light, ill-made darts of bamboo cane, pointed with hard wood, in which were many barbs. They maybe shot them with bows, but I am of opinion that they threw them with a stick, something in the manner of the New Hollanders. They came beyond us about 60 yards, but not in a point-blank direction. Besides these, many among them, maybe a fifth part of the whole, had in their hands a short piece of stick, maybe a hollow cane, which they swung sideways from them, and immediately fire flew from it, perfectly resembling the flash and smoke of a musket, and of no longer duration. For what purpose this was done is far above my guessing. They had with them several dogs, who ran after them, in the same manner as ours do in Europe. The house or shed that we saw was very mean and poor. It consisted of 4 stakes, drove into the ground, 2 being longer than the other 2. Over these were laid cocoa-nut leaves loose, and not half enough to cover it. By the cutting of these stakes, as well as of the arrows or darts which they threw at us, we concluded that they had no iron among them. As soon as ever the boat was hoisted in, we made sail, and steered away from this land, to the no small satisfaction of, I believe, 3/4 of our company. The sick being well, and the melancholy looked gay. The greatest part of them were now pretty far gone with the longing for home, which the physicians have gone so far as to esteem a disease under the name of nostalgia. Indeed, I can find hardly anybody in the ship clear of its effects but the captain, Dr. Solander, and myself. Indeed, we 3 have pretty constant employment for our minds, which I believe to be the best, if not the only remedy for it. 1770, September 4. Brisk trade and fine weather. The altered countenances of our common people were still more perceivable than they were yesterday. 2/3 allowance had, I believe, made the chief difference with them, for our provisions were now so much wasted by keeping that allowance was little more than was necessary to keep life and soul together. 1770, September 5. During last night a low island was seen, and in the morn another, of a flat appearance, but tolerably high. We supposed that these might be the Arrow Islands, as the latitude agreed very well, but if they were these isles, must be far nearer the coast of New Guinea than any of our draughts place them. Many very large blubbers, medusas, were seen, also eggbirds, bonitos, and one turtle. In the eve we deepened our water to 50 fathom, and saw then some small Mother Carey's chickens, Procellaria frigata, about us, which we always have looked upon as a mark of being a good distance from the land. We saw also a man-of-war bird, many nectaresses and gannets. Towards night a booby settled on our rigging and was caught, the first we have met with in the voyage. 1770, September 6. Pleasant trade. Our water deepened to 180 fathom. A tropic bird and 2 black and white gannets seen about the ship. At noon a large high island was in sight, possibly Timor land, though if so the charts have laid it down much too far to the southward. The supposition of its being so made us think of Timor, which had been visited by our countryman Dampier. This, though, made home recur to my mind stronger than it had done throughout the whole voyage. The distance I now conceived to be nothing very great. 1770, September 7. Trade as brisk and pleasant as ever. Infinite flying fish about the ship. Some nectaresses and man-of-war birds. Many gannets also seen. At night 2 boobies were caught. 1770, September 8. Much less wind today. Many gannets and boobies were seen. At night 2 of the latter were taken. 1770, September 9. Light breezes and almost calm. Myself, in my small boat, a shooting killed 3 dozen of boobies and gannets. The last proved to be the Pelicanus piscator of Linnaeus. At night a strong appearance of very high land was observed to the westward, which caused many different opinions. The seamen, however, in general, insisted on its being clouds, an opinion which its unusual height above the horizon, considered with respect to the faintness with which it appeared, seemed much to favour. 1770, September 10. Quite calm. The appearance of land to the west was again seen, and most of the seamen by it convinced that it really was such. Some, however, still held to their former opinion. Many dolphins were about the ship, and 1 shark was caught at sunset. The land appeared again in exactly the same place, which at last convinced our most sturdy unbelievers. 1770, September 11. By daybreak in the morn another shark was caught. The 2 together, weighing 126 pounds, were served to the ship's company, and every man in her, I may venture to affirm, from the captain to the swabber, dined heartily upon it. Many smokes ashore. 1770, September 12. As soon as the light was pretty clear, the land again appeared, 5 or 6 leagues off. By 7 the wind came to west, so we stood in for it. It was very high, rising in gradual slopes from the hills, which were in great measure covered with thick woods. Among them, however, we could distinguish bare spots of a large extent, which at least looked as if cleared by art. Many fires were also seen on all parts of the hills, some very high up. At nightfall we were within 1 1/2 miles of the beach, just abreast of a little inlet. The country seemed to answer very well the description which Dampier has given of Timor, the land close to the beach being covered with high spiring trees, which he likens to pines, casuarina, behind which was great appearance of saltwater creeks and many mangroves. In parts, however, were many coconut trees close down to the beach. The flat land seemed to reach in some places 2 or 3 miles before the rise of the first hill. We saw no appearance of plantations or houses near the sea, but the land looked most fertile, and from the many fires we had seen in different parts, we could not help having a good opinion of its population. 1770, September 13. With the wind as foul as ever, we continued to ply along shore, not gaining much, and being too far off to see anything but large fires, of which were several ashore. Our croakers began now to talk of the westerly monsoon, and say that they had sometime thought that the unusual briskness of the trade wind for some days before we fell in with this island was a sure prognostic of it. 1770, September 14. Our westerly wind still continued, and we plied with our usual success. Infinite albacores and bonitos were about the ship, attended, as they always are when near land, by some species of sterna. These were Dampier's New Holland noddies, which flew in large flocks hovering over the shoals of fish. Many man-of-war birds also attended, and entertained us by very frequently stooping at albacores so large that 20 times their strength could not have lifted them, had they been dexterous enough to seize them, which they never once effected. 1770, September 15. Wind came fair today, and left our melancholy ones to search for some new occasion of sorrow. There was much less of it than we could have wished, and yet enough to alter the appearance of the country very sensibly. The island was now hilly, though not near so high as it had been. The hills in general came quite down to the sea, and where they did not, instead of flats and mangrovey land, were immense groves of coconut trees. About a mile up from the beach began the plantations and houses, almost innumerable, standing under the shade of large groves of palms, appearing like fan palm, borassus. The plantations, which were in general enclosed with some kind of fence, reached almost to the tops of the hills, but near the beach were no certain marks of habitation seen. But what surprised us most was that, notwithstanding all these indisputable marks of populous country, we saw neither people nor any kind of cattle stirring all day, though our glasses were almost continually employed. 1770, September 16. Trade rather fresher than yesterday. Soon after breakfast, the small island of Rota was in sight, and soon after the opening appeared plain, which at last convinced our old unbelievers that the island we had so long been off was really Timor. Soon after dinner we passed the straits. The island of Rota was not mountainous or high like Timor, but consisted of hills and vales. On the east end of it, some of our people saw houses, but I did not. The north side had frequent sandy beaches, near which grew some few of the fan palm, but the greatest part was covered with a kind of brushy trees, which had few or no leaves upon them. The opening between Timor and the island called by Dampier Annabao, we plainly saw, which appeared narrow. Annabao itself looked much like Timor, only was rather less high. We saw on it no signs of cultivation, but as it was misty and we were well on the other side of the straits, which we judged to be 5 leagues over, we saw it but very indifferently. Off the western end of it was a small low sandy island covered with trees. Before night, however, we had left all behind us. About 10 o'clock a phenomenon appeared in the heavens, in many things resembling the aurora borealis, but differing materially in others. It consisted of a dull reddish light, reaching in height about 20 degrees above the horizon. Its extent was very different at different times, but never less than 8 or 10 points of the compass. Through and out of this passed rays of a brighter coloured light, tending directly upwards. These appeared and vanished nearly in the same time as those of the aurora borealis, but were entirely without the trembling or vibratory motion observed in that phenomenon. The body of it bore from the ship south-southeast. It lasted as bright as ever till near 12, when I went down to sleep, but how much longer I cannot tell. 1770, September 17. In the morn an island in sight, very imperfectly, if at all laid down in the charts. By 10 we were very near the east end of it. It was not high, but composed of gently sloping hills and vales, almost entirely cleared, and covered with innumerable palm trees. Near the beach were many houses, but no people were seen stirring. Soon after we passed the northeast point, and saw on the beach a large flock of sheep, but still no people. The north side of the isle appeared scarce at all cultivated, but like that of Rota, covered with thick brushwood, almost or quite destitute of leaves. Among these, as we passed along, we saw numerous flocks of sheep, but no houses or plantations. At last one was discovered in a grove of coconut trees, and it was resolved to send a boat in order to attempt a commerce with people who seemed so well able to supply our many necessities. The ship plied off and on, and a lieutenant went. Before he returned, we saw on the hills 2 men on horseback, who seemed to ride as for their amusement, often looking at the ship, a circumstance which made us at once conclude that there were Europeans among the islanders, by whom we should be received at least more politely than we were used to, by uncivilized Indians. After a very short stay he returned, bringing word that he had seen Indians, in all respects as colour, dress, etc., much resembling the Malays, that they very civilly invited him ashore and conversed with him by signs, but neither party could understand the other. They were totally unarmed except for knives, which they wore in their girdles, and had with them a jackass, a sure sign that Europeans had been among them. In plying off and on, we had had no ground, though very near a coral shoal, which ran off from the island, so had no hopes of anchorage here. It was therefore resolved that we should go to the lee side of the island, in hopes there to find a bank. In the meantime, however, the boat, with some truck, should go ashore at the coconut grove in hopes to purchasing some trifle refreshments for the sick, in case we should be disappointed. It accordingly put off, and Dr. Solander went in it. Before it reached the shore we saw 2 new horsemen, one of whom had on a complete European dress, blue coat, white waistcoat, and laced hat. These, as the boat lay ashore, seemed to take little notice of her, but only sauntered about looking much at the ship. Many more horsemen, however, and still more footmen gathered round our people who were ashore, and we had the satisfaction of seeing several coconuts brought into the boat, a sure sign that peace and plenty reigned ashore. After a stay of about an hour and a half, the boat made a signal of having had intelligence of a harbour to the leeward, and we in consequence bore away for it. The boat, following soon, came on board and told us that the people had behaved in an uncommonly civil manner, that they had seen some of their principal people, who were dressed in fine linen and had chains of gold round their necks, that they had not been able to trade, the owner of the coconut trees not being there, but had got about 2 dozen of coconuts given as a present by these principal people, who accepted of linen in return, and made them plainly understand by drawing a map upon the sand that on the lee side of the island was a bay in which we might anchor near a town and buy sheep, hogs, fruit, fowls, etc. They talked much of the Portuguese and of Larntuca on the Isle of Endy, from which circumstance it was probable that the Portuguese were somewhere on the island, though none of the natives could speak more than a word or 2 of the language, and the more so, as one of the Indians, in speaking of the town, made a sign of something we could see there, which would show us that we were right, by crossing his fingers, which a Portuguese who was in the boat immediately interpreted into a cross, a supposition that appeared very probable. That just before they put off, the man in a European dress came toward them, but the officer in the boat, not having his commission about him, thought proper to put off immediately, without staying to speak to him or know what countryman he was. We sailed along shore, and after having passed a point of land, found a bay sheltered from the trade wind, in which we soon discovered a large Indian town or village, on which we stood in hoisting a jack on the foretopmast head. Soon after, to our no small surprise, Dutch colours were hoisted in town, and 3 guns fired. We, however, proceeded, and just at dark got soundings, and anchored about 1 1/2 miles from the shore. 1770, September 18. In the morn the boat, with the 2nd lieutenant, went ashore, and was received by a guard of 20 or 30 Indians armed with muskets, who conducted him to the town, about a mile in the country, marching without any order or regularity, and carrying away with them Dutch colours, which had been hoisted upon the beach opposite to where the ship lay. Here he was introduced to the Rajah or Indian king, who he told by a Portuguese interpreter that we were an English man of war, who had been long at sea and had many sick on board, for whom we wanted to purchase such refreshments as the island afforded. He answered that he was willing to supply us with everything we should want, but being in alliance with the Dutch East Indian Company, he was not allowed to trade with any other people without their consent, which, however, he would immediately apply for to a Dutchman belonging to that company, who was the only white man residing upon the island. A letter was accordingly dispatched immediately, and after some hours' waiting answered by the man in person, who assured him with many civilities that we were at liberty to buy of the natives whatever we pleased. He expressed a desire of coming on board, as well as the king and several of his attendants, provided, however, that some of our people might stay on shore, on which 2 were left, and about 2 they arrived. Our dinners were ready, and they readily agreed to dine with us. At setting down, however, the king excused himself, saying that he did not imagine that we, who were white men, would suffer him who was black to set down in our company. A compliment, however, removed his scruples, and he and his prime minister sat down and eat sparingly. During all dinner we received many professions of friendship from both the king and the European, who was a native of Saxony by the name of Johann Christopher Lange. Mutton was our fare. The king expressed a desire of having an English sheep. We had one left, which was presented to him. An English dog was then asked for, and my greyhound presented to him. Mynheer Lange then hinted that a spying glass would be acceptable, and was immediately presented with one. We were told that the island abounded in buffaloes, sheep, hogs, and fowls, all which should the next day be drove down to the beach, and we might buy any quantity of them. This agreeable intelligence put us all into high spirits, and the liquor went about full as much as either Mynheer Lange or the Indians could bear, who however expressed a desire of going away before they were quite drunk. They were received upon deck, as they had been when they came on board, by the marines under arms. The king expressed a desire of seeing them exercise, which accordingly they did, and fired 3 rounds, much to his Majesty's satisfaction, who expressed great surprise, particularly at their so speedily cocking their guns, which he expressed by striking a stick upon the side of the ship, saying that all the locks made but one click. Dr. Solander and myself went ashore in the boat with them. As soon as we put off, they saluted the ship with 3 cheers, which the ship answered with 5 guns. We landed and walked up to the town, which consisted of a good many houses, some tolerably large, each being a roof of thatch covering a boarded floor, supported by pillars 3 or 4 feet from the ground. Before we had been long there, it began to grow dark, and we returned on board, having only just tasted their palm wine, which had a very sweet taste, and suited all our palates very well, giving us at the same time hopes that it might be serviceable to our sick, as being the fresh and unfermented juice of the tree, it promised anti-scorbutic virtues. 1770, September 19. Savu reached. In the morn we went ashore and proceeded immediately to the House of Assembly, a large house, which we had yesterday mistaken for the king's palace. This, as well as 2 or 3 more in the town, or Negri as the Indians called it, had been built by the Dutch East Indian Company. They are distinguished from the rest by 2 pieces of wood, one at each end of the ridge of the house, resembling cows' horns. Undoubtedly the thing designed by the Indian, who on the 17th made a sign of the mark, by which we were to know the town by crossing his fingers, which our Catholic Portuguese interpreted into a cross, from whence chiefly we were assured that the settlement was originally Portuguese. In this House of Assembly we met Mynheer Lange and the Raja Amadojo Lomijara, attended by many of the principal people. We told them that we had in the boat an assortment of what few goods we had to truck with, and desired leave to bring them ashore, which was immediately granted, and orders given accordingly. We then attempted to settle the price of buffaloes, sheep, hogs, etc., which were to be paid in money. But here Mynheer Lange left us, and told us that we must settle that with the natives, who would bring down large quantities to the beach. By this time the morning was pretty far advanced, and we, resolving not to go on board and eat salt meat when such a profusion of fresh was continually talked of, petitioned his Majesty that we might have liberty to purchase a small hog, some rice, etc., and employ his subjects to cook them for our dinner. He answered that if we could eat victuals dressed by his subjects, which he could hardly suppose, he would do himself the honour of entertaining us. We expressed our gratitude, and sent immediately on board for liquors. About 5 o'clock dinner was ready, consisting of 36 dishes, or rather baskets, containing alternately rice and boiled pork, and 3 earthenware bowls of soup, or rather the broth, in which the pork had been boiled. These were ranged on the floor, and mats laid round them, for us to sit upon. We were now conducted by turns to a hole in the floor, near which stood a man with a basket of water in his hand. Here we washed our hands, and then ranged ourselves in order round the victuals, waiting for the king to sit down. We were told, however, that the custom of the country was that the entertainer never sits down to meat with his guests. However, if we suspected the victuals to be poisoned, he would willingly do it. We suspected nothing, and therefore desired that all things might go as usual. All then sitting down, we eat with good appetites, the Prime Minister and Mynheer Lange partaking with us. Our wine passed briskly about, the Rajah alone refusing to drink with us, saying that it was wrong for the master of the feast to be in liquor. The pork was excellent, the rice as good, the broth not bad. The spoons only, which were made of leaves, were so small that few of us had patience to eat it. Everyone, however, made a hearty dinner, and as soon as we had done, removed, as the custom it seemed was, to let the servants and seamen take our places. These could not dispatch all, but when the women came to take away, they forced them to take away with them all the pork that was left. Before dinner, Mynheer Lange had mentioned to us a letter which he had in the morning received from the governor of Timor. The particulars of it were now discussed. It acquainted him that a ship had been seen off that island, and had steered from thence towards that which we were now upon. In case such ship was to touch there in any distress, she was to be supplied with what she wanted, but was not to be allowed to make any stay more than was necessary, and was particularly required not to take any large presents to the interior people, or to leave any with the principal ones, to be distributed among them after he was gone. This, we were told, did not at all extend to the beads or other small pieces of cloth, which we gave the natives in return for their small civilities, as bringing us palm wine, etc. Some of our gentlemen were of opinion that the whole of this letter was an imposition, but whether it was or not, I shall not take upon myself to determine. In the evening we had intelligence from our trading place that no buffaloes or hogs had been brought down, a few sheep only, which were taken away before our people who had sent for money could procure it. Some few fowls, however, were brought, in a large quantity of a kind of syrup made from the juice of the palm tree, which, though infinitely superior to molasses or treacle, sold at a very small price. We complained to Mynheer Lange. He said that as we had not ourselves been down upon the beach, the natives were afraid to take money of any one else, lest it should be false. On this the captain went immediately down, but could see no kettle. While he was gone, Mr. Lange complained that our people had yet offered no gold for anything. This, he said, the islanders were displeased at, who had expected to have gold for their stock. End of section 46. September 1770, Part 1.